evening and welcome to the fourth Awarelogue Lecture Forum, where we are focusing on a developing situation, a situation from our region, from the neighborhood. A country that has had a checkered past, has had several ups and downs, is going through another turning point. This turning point is not only affecting one country, but it's affecting countries in the region and is going to have a much bigger impact on the international stage. And this is why we have decided to focus this particular session of the Awarelogue Lecture Forum on Afghanistan. And we're talking about a changing Afghanistan and the impact on South Asia. We are indeed honored that we've been able to invite, and he has accepted our invitation to be our keynote speaker today. Firstly, thank you very much, Dr. Shabbir, for taking time. I know in Pakistan, there are a lot of pressing matters at the moment. This issue is being hotly debated, is being hotly discussed, and it is a very critical time in your country. We were very fortunate to have Amina Khan a few days ago on Sunday itself as the development of the situation was continuing to grow. She joined us on the Awarelogue Alert, and we're very happy that today we are able to have you as our guest key speaker who is going to deliver the guest address. So just to tell you a little bit about Dr. Shabbir, he is currently the director of the China-Pakistan study at the Center of the Institute of International Strategic Studies Islamabad, where he oversees research and advocacy on all facets of Pakistan-China relations. He holds a PhD in international relations from the Qadi Azam University, Islamabad. He has an MPhil in international relations from the University of Balochistan and a master's in political science from the University of Punjab. He is also someone who has been a visiting scholar at the Sigur Center for Asian Studies, George Washington University in the USA. He has been on the faculty of the Institute of Strategic Studies Research and Analysis, the National Defense University, where he was responsible for conducting national security programs. He has also been editing the quarterly magazine, China-Pakistan Study Center. He regularly contributes to national as well as international newspapers on several critical issues and has several publications, books, chapters to his credit. We are indeed honored, sir, to have you with us, and thank you once again on behalf of the Awarelogue Initiative for taking time to give us of your perception, your views, and also engage in a discussion with us thereafter as we focus on this very critical issue that is developing in South Asia. So without further ado, we invite you, sir, to speak to us on a changing Afghanistan, impact on South Asia.
Thank you very much, Dr. George. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Okay. Thank you very much. Indeed, it's a great pleasure and honor to have been invited by you on Awarelogue Forum to speak about something very important today, not only for our region, but for entire world. I have an honor to have someone very special on the panel and as well as audience. And it's really great pleasure to be speaking to you on such topic. When we talk of Afghanistan, and of course the regional countries as well as global players were watching this developing situation in Afghanistan very cautiously and carefully for almost 1 decade, and since last 2 decades, in fact, things happened for the worst in Afghanistan, and there were hopes, there were suspicion, there were hopes pinned to the players, global as well as regional players in the region. When we talk today, we know that Taliban have taken control of Afghanistan. The dispensation which was created by United States of America and its allies in Afghanistan, led by President Ashraf Ghani, has diminished. President Ashraf Ghani, I think, was successful in finding his place in somewhere in Middle East. And the most important thing is that there are now questions on how Taliban are going to create a political dispensation, whether it is going to be all what they did in 90s, are they are going to create something inclusive, which is expected of from the regional players as well as international players. So I think the whole region as well as the global players are finger crossed and expecting Taliban to get into negotiation with domestic players, various factions in Afghanistan, as well as regional countries. So I'll just speak randomly. I'll give my assertions on what has happened and how it impacts South Asian region. And then we can have answer question session, which will enable me to learn more from the audience as well, because I would expect pointed questions also. Looking back, 20 years back, you know, all along these 20 years, there were narratives, there were perceptions, there were policies framed to deal with the Afghan situation. There were strategies adopted by the NATO, led by United States of America, but there was a ground situation. So many things we know, academics and scholars, you know, sitting in the capitals of the world were thinking as to how they should deal with the situation in Afghanistan, and there was something happening on ground. So today we learned that there was a marked difference in what was a thought process, maybe in the scholarship in Washington D.C. And elsewhere, and what was happening on ground. So the ground situation is that Taliban have been in control of Kabul. Now, what is a thought process in the United States of America today? There's a military defeat. Do you call it a military defeat? Do you call it kind of humiliation of Vietnam type? Do you call it as a failure? Or do you call it a big blow to American pride and the pride of the forces that we have from NATO countries? So there's a mix of situation. There is a public opinion. There's an opinion in public in the United States of America about Afghanistan. There's an opinion in scholarship in America. There is divided opinion in the policymakers in Washington D.C. So there's a confusion as to what exactly happened and why this day the American forces and Americans were to see this day. So it is very important to I think discuss reactions of various players. I will not go into the details, but I would just like to refer to reactions of various countries in various capitals, because that's very important when we look at the future of Afghan situation. So the public opinion, as I already discussed, in Washington D.C. is critical. In America, the public opinion is against the policies. The President Biden is under a lot of criticism. Policymakers looked divided. Academics are, of course, surprised. Intelligence community's assessment of Afghan situation proved grossly incorrect, because there were estimates that the Taliban would at least take 6 months to overrun Kabul, whereas they did it in a record time, and within weeks they were able to control Kabul, which was really grossly mistaken by the intelligence community of NATO and United States of America. There's a chaos in Kabul, as there are the media in parts of the world differs on what is happening in Kabul and Afghanistan. There's a difference in media about how people are reacting to Afghan takeover, Taliban takeover, and there are hopes and there are suspicions about how Taliban are going to react, or how Taliban are going to unfold their policies, and are they going to be any different from what they were doing in the 90s. So when we talk of chaos in Kabul, it is again an irrefutable evidence of failure of United States of America, which was there for the last 20 years. There's an important thing in the United States of America at the moment that people think that President Trump adopted a kind of deterrence model, which in fact President Joe Biden probably failed to adopt. So that was one of the reasons quoted by no less than former Foreign Secretary of State of America, Mike Pompeo. Now, but still, there's a lot to be done by United States of America in times to come, because it's a responsibility of international powers to come to some kind of solution to the issue in Afghanistan. And of course, I just would like to quote Press Secretary John Kirby of Pentagon, who says one of things that we wouldn't anticipate and didn't anticipate was degree to which Afghan forces capitulated without fight. Now, another important country in the region is Russia. Now, the regional countries have reacted differently to this situation. The Russian seem to be satisfied with what has happened, since they are not Russian intelligentsia and potential scholarship. They do not appear to be worrying about Taliban takeover, as they think Taliban are focused inward. They focus only in their own country. So I think in their view, Taliban do not pose any kind of threat to outside their borders, and Islamic extremism, extremist factions which people feel threatened from, in Russian scholarship's opinion, they are not going to be any more threat under this new Taliban dispensation. So Russia appears to be satisfied about it. Now, another important country is China. China is one country which kept itself neutral in post 9/11 period, and since they were not engaging with Taliban in presence of American presence in Kabul, Afghanistan, they only engaged Taliban when in 2014 Americans announced a partial withdrawal from Afghanistan, and they were able to communicate with Taliban, and since then they were good negotiators. So there's a kind of a degree of relationship between Chinese leadership and Taliban. And you must have witnessed immediately before the fall of Kabul, there was a delegation received by no less than Foreign Minister of China in Beijing, and there were talks for the peace process, which of course culminated in fall of Kabul. So China seems to be expecting change, and of course they are also looking for an inclusive change. But one thing is important that for China, since China has had threats from unstable Afghanistan, they had a kind of militancy spillover impact in China. So there are challenges also. Like there are challenges in case there's instability in Afghanistan. There are challenges in case Taliban fail to control or check terrorism. There is a challenge for China if there's uncertainty continues to exist in China, in Kabul. So China will be impacted grossly. And but overall, I think fall of Kabul has strengthened China's position in the region as a regional player. Now, India is another important country. I think India was surprised over what has happened because India did a lot of investment. They had investment to the tune of $3 billion, which appears to be wasted in terms of the latest situation. And India is also perplexed over how to react to such situation where Indian nationals are fleeing from Afghanistan. Though Taliban have extended a helping hand to the fleeing Indians from Afghanistan, and they wish to have continued diplomatic relations with India also, but situation is still precarious, and it appears that India's future in Afghanistan is bleak. Iran is also very cautious, and but with fall of Kabul, security challenges for Iran have reduced. Of course, since there is an animosity, hostility going on between the United States of America and Iran. So by American leaving Afghanistan and Kabul going back to Taliban, the security challenges that Iran faced in the region have reduced considerably. Now, when we come to Pakistan, as I always said, when the situation in Afghanistan had adverse impact on people of Afghanistan, but any country outside Afghanistan, single country that was the most affected country, that was Pakistan. So, Pakistan was since 5-6 years, since post-2014, was struggling hard and playing its role for the peace process and bringing peace to Afghanistan. And consistent Pakistan stance was that Pakistan wanted Afghan-owned, Afghan-led solution of the Afghan problem. Now, even today, Pakistan, the government of Pakistan is very cautious in giving statement over the situation, and probably there is an expectation that there should be an inclusive government, inclusive arrangement, inclusive political dispensation in Afghanistan to deal with the problems. With fall of Kabul, there were many problems immediately. There were many problems that we would foresee occurring in between Afghanistan and Pakistan. The first was that in Pakistan there is a perception that the United States would need a scapegoating factor, or a country to be scapegoated for this happening in Afghanistan, and that is Pakistan. Though Pakistan has been trying to use its leverage over Afghans, over Taliban, wherever it could, but after all, the peace process was to be led by Afghanis. Peace process was to be led by those people who were fighting for probably their freedom and for their cause. So there's a kind of tense situation. There's a kind of tense situation between United States and Pakistan, which will go for some time. But I think soon, sometime, the United States and NATO countries will realize that Pakistan is still a very important country to manage peace in Afghanistan, because there's a close coordination and dialogue required to address the changing situation in Afghanistan. With regard to Pakistan, for example, we expected in case of instability, in case of insurgency-like situation in Afghanistan, Pakistan was the country which was expecting a spillover impact in Pakistan, because we expected a lot of refugees coming in Pakistan, and we were worried that this instability will cause a lot of problem. And militancy will also rise in our country, because there is a kind of spillover of militancy in Pakistan. And in previous years, we saw that when there was a Tariq-e-Taliban Afghanistan, it actually strengthened a kind of local Pakistani terrorist groups like Tariq-e-Taliban Pakistan. So we see that there is some kind of reduction in such possibilities. Since Pakistan-US relationship from Afghanistan, in case of Afghanistan, China will emerge as an important country, because China will call the shots in a manner that I mentioned, that China being neutral in Afghan affairs for the last decade or so, was in fact had some kind of leverage with Afghani leadership that it can use now to bring peace, or maybe can help bring an inclusive government or inclusive dispensation in Kabul. Now, generally, when we in Pakistan, we think that in the previous Taliban time, in the previous Taliban government, we were the country, one of the three countries which recognized Taliban's government as legitimate. So this time, Pakistan is playing cautious, and Pakistan is looking for a kind of regional approach to recognition issue. And I think that's a good policy. Pakistan is also waiting and seeing what is happening and what Taliban are going to do, where Taliban are going to move, and expecting Taliban to kind of make an inclusive. When we say inclusive means that there are factions in Afghanistan. If Afghanistan is multi-ethnic society, and we expect a representation from all the factions of multi-ethnic Afghanistan to join a government, a council, or a dispensation that can bring some political entity in Afghanistan. Pakistan during the last 2 decades had a lot of problems from Afghanistan, because we thought India had a lot of influence in Afghanistan, and there was a lot of terrorism being carried out in erstwhile Fatah and in Balochistan, and we knew that it's Indian factor which was very active in Afghanistan, and probably like Iran, we also have reduced security threat from Afghanistan with America leaving Afghanistan. Now, I think this is the time that Afghanistan, people of Afghanistan and Taliban have realization. So I sense that the Taliban of 90s, these Taliban of 2021 are different from Talibans of 1990s. And we expect some sense prevailing, because they also understand that there are problems with governance that we saw in previous times. For example, there are human rights issues, there are women rights issues, there are governance issues with regards to Taliban governance style. But the way they are coming up low, there is a thought process going on in Taliban. They are connected to various factions. They are talking to Abdullah. They are talking to former President Ahmed Karzai. I think they are negotiating just comprehensive government structure in Afghanistan, and I expect something good coming from Kabul. But at the same time, when we talk of regional approach to Afghan problem, for instance, we expect regional countries to have a consensus approach towards Afghan problem with regard to legitimacy and recognition. Similarly, when the regional countries recognize Taliban rule or the inclusive government in Afghanistan, so that the same will be expected from the international players also. There has to be some kind of consensus. I think when this is the time that we need to give Afghans a chance to prove that they can govern well, they can come up towards expectation, they can take care of human rights, they can take care of women's rights. So I think it's premature to say, and we are also finger crossed waiting as to how this whole thing unfolds, and we expect a much better dispensation this time. So when we talk of the region is also, I think it's very important for China and for Pakistan. For example, there's a Belt and Road Initiative by China, which is in fact conditioned by peace in Afghanistan. Peace in Afghanistan is very important for not only for China, but for the entire region. Similarly, we also in Pakistan have China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. This is also a very important project, though we had a lot of hostility to this project, and India has been undermining this project since its beginning. But these projects and these projects are very important with regards to connectivity in the region, and we expect that there's a peace in Afghanistan, and that peace can help us expand this initiative towards Central Asia. So all these stakeholders, the regional countries are stakeholder in peace in Afghanistan. So let's see in coming few days. We have Taliban deciding on how they like to govern Afghanistan, and it should benefit all the regional countries. And world community also helps Afghanistan to live peacefully. Of course, the most important last thing that I would like to mention is that American presence will in fact giving Afghanistan an opportunity to exist or live. Like there was a war economy in Afghanistan, and now when they've left, so there are going to be economic problems for Afghan government to run. But I think the world should realize that since they are a kind of responsibility in creating a kind of mess in Afghanistan, so now they have responsibility to rebuild Afghanistan and help them to rebuild their country, reconstruct their country. And that is how I think regionally and internationally we should help Afghanistan. Thank you very much. These are some of my assertions. I would like to, I'm available to answer any questions. Thank you very much, George.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shabbir. Thank you for that very impressive outlay, not only of some of the concerns coming out of that country, but the implications on immediate neighbors and neighbors even beyond that, and some of the global players as well. We invite everyone to send in your questions via the chat box. Please feel free to type in your question. We will field them to Dr. Shabbir. Dr. Shabbir, if I were to go straight into some of the last points that you mentioned and connect them up to what you said earlier. You talked about the economic situation. Afghanistan was estimated in 2019 to require several billions of dollars in terms of assistance for economic recovery. Today, they are in that same situation. But militarily, that country is very strong. Do you feel this is going to be a very dangerous combination? Militarily, they have inherited, or the Taliban who are now in control, have inherited a massive armory of weapons. But on the economic side, there is a lot more to be done. How concerned is Pakistan about that?
Of course, when we talk of military hardware, there was a lot left in Afghanistan. But there's a problem of operating that hardware. Most of the military has actually escaped, has been able to flee. So they are now, Taliban have also asked them to join back military. And of course, there are aircraft, but there's no pilots. So I think it will take time for Taliban to, build that kind of military which can pose a threat to anyone. But more important thing is that in my assessment, or whatever I think about Taliban, they should now focus on economy, because that is the most important thing. Because I think there are measures being taken to freeze their, money placed elsewhere. So I think the most important thing that Taliban would have to address would be the economy of that country. Military, I think they have done their military, they have achieved their military objectives. So there's no immediate military objectives in Afghanistan. I think they should focus on economy, and how the world is going to help them. The world is going to help Taliban if they reflect, if they display a kind of accommodation to others. Like we talk of inclusive government, we talk of inclusive dispensation, and we expect that they respect human rights, they give women their rights, they open school for girls, they open media for everyone, they should give freedom of speech. So these steps, Taliban's behavior will be deciding factor for world to help them. And economy is, I think, the first thing that needs to be addressed in Afghanistan.
Absolutely. So Nirash asked the question, can we expect any resistance to Taliban from warlords like Ahmad Massoud? Will warlords and other factions like the Afghan army together threaten the Taliban's existence?
Right. Since Taliban did not have any resistance from anywhere, and one thing you must have noticed, wherever Taliban went, they went to any province, any capital of a province, they negotiated this surrender. So they did not resort to violence at first place. They resorted to violence only where it was absolutely necessary. So they negotiated surrender of everyone wherever they went, when they were advancing towards Kabul. So one, they did not have resistance when they were, advancing. Second, when they have captured. So there's an expectation from Taliban to form an exclusive government where all the factions are represented equally. And Taliban also realized this, that they would not have recognition or legitimacy unless they are represented by all factions of Afghan population. So there are voices from Massoud and Dostam faction and others about resistance. They also call for an inclusive government. They say, like son of Ahmad Shah Massoud says, that we will resist if there's no inclusive government. So if there's an inclusive government, I think there'll be less resistance. And of course, the way Taliban conduct their governance, the way Taliban, the way Taliban, act in their governance.
Thank you. Tatsarmi asked the question, Dr. Shabbir. In your outlay, you mentioned that the Taliban was in the 1990s and the ones in 2021 are different. And a lot of stakeholders have come on board at this particular stage. The question goes on to say, and a lot of stakeholders have expectations towards them to rebuild as a government and maintain peace. My question is, remembering that Taliban is a terrorist group, whether in the 90s or 2021, how can we expect them to give basic human rights to Afghan citizens? Do you think they will take a different approach? I guess it's proof for the pudding is in the eating, but do we have to be really that optimistic? Hopefully it is so, but what do you think, sir?
Right. George, one thing is very important to see. When we say that they're terrorists, then I think a lot of room for discussion ends. So, it's just a matter of perspective. For example, Taliban's perspective, that is, it was a freedom fight. We earned a freedom from Americans. We never wanted foreign troops on Afghan land. So we never, we could not tolerate any foreigner on. So this is their perspective. So it was war of freedom from Taliban's perspective. And of course, those who were fighting them, they called them terrorists. Now, what is next? They have earned this in 20 years, 2 decades. They fought for it, and they negotiated with it. For the first time in the history of United States of America, it happened that Americans negotiated an agreement with a non-state actor. The Doha agreement of 29 February was in fact with Taliban. Taliban were a non-state actor, non-state entity. So, there was, they reached a conclusion that it's only them that they should do an agreement with. It was not Ashraf Ghani. Had Ashraf Ghani been powerful, had Ashraf Ghani been the real ruler of Afghanistan, they would have, had agreement with them. So we'll have to come to terms with certain facts. Fact is that Taliban have won this freedom, as they call it. Now, future of Afghanistan, as I say, it lies lies with Afghanistan and, of course, with the cooperation of regional as well as global players. But it is on us, on Taliban as well. As I say, no, they were a terrorist outfit, and people still think they are terrorist outfit. If they conduct differently, they talk to other factions in Afghanistan. There's an inclusive setup in Afghanistan. There's a a broad-based government representing all factions of Afghanistan, and they take care of certain facts, certain things. For example, now there's a thought process. For example, there's not women are not living only in Afghanistan. There are women living in France also. There are women living in elsewhere also, and their rights are also important as the rights of Afghan women. So I think the world has to accommodate Taliban and see as to how they act now, because we expect, like in my assessment, they are going on Facebook, they are using social media, they are telling people not to leave Afghanistan, they are telling people you are safe in your houses, they are telling women you'll go to school, you'll go to jobs, and you'll do all kind of things by remaining within the Islamic Sharia law. So they are trying to give certain, they are trying to accommodate larger factions of society. But as you said, I think taste of the pudding is in eating it. We'll have to see. We'll have to see how they conduct in future.
Definitely, absolutely. Banru asked the questions: how would the hasty departure, and especially Biden's quote on the Afghans lacking the will to fight, be discouraging to US allies such as Taiwan, or do you think it would enable Washington to focus more now on the Indo-Pacific region?
This is there are conspiracy theories. Like conspiracy theories, for the last 20 years, there was a faction of scholars who would think that America would sit in Afghanistan because America wants China to contain China. So when America left, that conspiracy theory dies. So we in Pakistan felt that America should stay in Afghanistan till such time they form a broad-based consensus government in Afghanistan, which sustainable broad-based consensus government in Afghanistan, so that there's a peace in Afghanistan when they leave. But they left hastily, and in fact, it's something good happened that the transition was very bloodless. Otherwise, we expected a lot of mess in Afghanistan. We were worried in Pakistan. We were worried that the moment they leave Afghanistan in a mess, it will just jump. They will go into insurgency situation, and the spillover impact. Of course, Pakistan was also one of the important countries bordering with Afghanistan, and we were the victim. So I think another thing is that America to have an influence in Indo-Pacific region, it's not important for them to be physically located here. America is still a superpower. America still can operate from around the region, and it's basically that Indo-Pacific influence in Indo-Pacific region primarily is driven by America's relation with the countries in the Indo-Pacific region. its relationship with the countries in Indo-Pacific actually drives America's influence in the region. So the conspiracy theory that America needs to be present in Afghanistan to oversee China, in fact, I think it has reduced its relevance.
Pani asked the question with regard to COVID-19, because we've heard also the Afghan ambassador in Sri Lanka talking about the 3 C's: conflict, climate change, and COVID. So Pani asked the question: what is the COVID-19 situation in Afghanistan? What kind of medical assistance is Afghanistan expecting from regional, extra-regional countries, especially regarding getting a COVID-19 vaccine amidst a chaotic situation? Is there emphasis on COVID?
Just on a lighter note, there's no COVID in Afghanistan. So there is a COVID situation, of course, but I think COVID situation in Afghanistan is not as grave as it is elsewhere, and I think they do not expect something big help handling with the COVID situation. Of course, they will get into some economic difficulties with regards to running economy, some kind of financial help they would need to run the country. But I think COVID situation is not as grave as it is found in other countries. I think they have no immediate threat from COVID at the moment.
Okay. Banura is asking the question about China's moderate stance towards the Taliban. Would this reflect a change in perceptions across most Central Asian countries as well?
I think for the last couple of years, there were different countries, those who were in negotiation with Afghanistan. Like there were Doha peace process going on for a long time. And China was very keen on what is happening in Doha peace process and peace processes elsewhere. For example, Russia also was very active. China was very active. Central Asian states were very active. You see that this is very important. Peace in Afghanistan is important from Chinese perspective because China's expansion towards Central Asia is directly related to peace in Afghanistan. So peace in Afghanistan is very important. Second, there's a small part of Afghanistan which is linked to China, the Wakhan corridor. So in the past, there was a militancy being carried out from Wakhan to China, and China had concerns, and that these concerns were conveyed to Taliban leaders when they visited China. So it is very important for China to expand towards Central Asia, and Afghanistan is very important for this peaceful move towards China. Second, there are assurances required by Taliban for countries. For example, China wanted Taliban leaders to assure that there's no militancy spillover in Xinjiang province of China. So there's a kind of, they also say, for example, now they gave a statement that they would unarm Taliban Pakistan in Afghanistan, and they will term them as refugees. Now, this is very positive development for Pakistan, because we think that Taliban Pakistan would impact adversely, when you have a militant organization taking over Kabul, like Taliban. So what spillover impact we expected? We expected TTP and other similar kind of terrorist organization will, raise their heads in Pakistan and work against the state of Pakistan. So there is a realization in Taliban that they do not have to support foreign elements on their soil. They do not have to support foreign elements on their soil working against other countries. So this is a very positive development. That is why the China stance on Taliban is soft. That is why we also have a soft corner for Taliban, that as long as they are not terrorists anymore, as long as they do not breed terrorism in their country, on their land anymore, so they're acceptable. So we expect that the spillover impact that was to come to Pakistan in case of Taliban Pakistan has lessened. So this is a welcome development for Pakistan.
Shivan asked the question, the administration of Ashraf Ghani was very vocal in condemning Pakistan for supporting the Taliban to destabilize Afghanistan. In your opinion, on what basis was this argument formed? Do any stakeholders in Pakistan benefit from a destabilized Afghanistan in terms of the credibility of his claims?
This is a very important question. So from day one, since 9/11, since attack on Afghanistan, we have been consistent in saying that peace in Afghanistan is peace in Pakistan. If there's no peace in Afghanistan, there's no peace in Pakistan. Our peace is directly directly related to peace in Afghanistan. This is one Pakistan's stance, and I think there was a consistency in our stance about peace in Afghanistan. Now, when we talk of President Ashraf Ghani, you see, there were elements in his government who were continuously spreading venom against Pakistan. They were speaking against Pakistan, and they were trying to, and there were instances where the NDS, RAW, and Afghan government were, hands in gloves to carry out some kind of terrorist operation in our Asal Fata, in our KP province, and in Balochistan. So Ashraf Ghani we have been requesting him, Pakistani government has been requesting him to, unless, you should not let anybody use your soil for against any other country. So there was consistent, request to President Ashraf Ghani for peace in Afghanistan as well as peace in Pakistan. And when we talk of, at least when we tell Taliban, don't use your land against us. So similar kind of thing we were requesting President Ashraf Ghani also. So I think in my assessment, President Ashraf Ghani was not actually accommodating our concerns. You see, Pakistan was the most affected country. We are hosting 4 million refugees, Afghan refugees for long 40 years. So we were a very important country for Afghanistan. So we expected Afghanistan to do some kind of, don't at least let your country be used against Pakistan, at least for terrorist purposes. Thank you.
Barara is asking the question, to what extent, and this is leading on from the refugee issue also, to what extent do you think the influx of refugees, human trafficking, and proliferation of such related activities and actors would have on the relationship between Afghanistan and Turkey, Afghanistan and Iran?
You see, the influx that the danger was that when you have influx of refugees, you can have terrorists in the garb of refugees. So since we do not expect many refugees coming into Pakistan and elsewhere in other countries, so there's less possibility of this refugee cover used for terrorist activities. So I don't think so that we have immediate problem of this refugee, and of course this cover of terrorism under the garb of coming in the garb of refugees. So I think so far. So tomorrow, I don't know what happens tomorrow, because since we are waiting for a kind of dispensation to be carried out in Afghanistan, we think it will take time for Taliban to unfold their policies, but we'll have to see exactly what happens in future in this regard.
This is a question coming from Shantini, who's talking about India. Didn't India ever think of such a turn of events taking place when they were first investing in Afghanistan, which according to you would go to waste now? This also leads on to that point, I guess, that after 1979, India took on a relatively neutral stance, let's say, when the Soviet Union was invited or invaded Afghanistan at that particular stage. India is rather silent at the moment too. I guess all countries are waiting. What are we waiting for?
Some countries are, settling down with grief, they have had with this situation. India, since in post 2001, the post 9/11 era, has been continuously using Afghan soil to create disturbances in Afghanistan, in Aswal Fata, in KP province and Balochistan. So with Taliban coming in, since the dispensation in Afghanistan, actually they were collaborating with like Ashraf Ghani's government in Afghanistan. So now when they have Taliban in power, so they expect that now their leverage, their influence in Afghanistan has waned. So, but as I say, it is on part of, for example, Taliban spokesperson says that we would like to have relations with neighbors, good relations with neighbors, and they have also asked Indian diplomats who were in Afghanistan to stay back, and they've also helped them to fly off Kabul. So we'll have to see, wait and see, and India will also have to change their policies towards the regional neighbors, and India will also have to have some kind of introspection with regard to their regional policies with countries, smaller countries in the region. And I think in times to come, there was a danger of Indian presence in Afghanistan. We in Pakistan at least feel less threatened by that kind of danger in our western border.
Dr. Shabbir, Mahesh is asking the question, what will be the role of Sark as a regional organization in light of the growing situation in Afghanistan? Do you see anything happening out of Sark?
This is a very important question, George, because Afghanistan is also a member of Sark. India is also a member of Sark. When I say there is a regional approach to solution in Afghanistan, so that means all regional countries, which include Sri Lanka, Nepal, smaller countries also in the Sark, Pakistan, India, and other countries. So Sark has not been very active, and it's primarily because of the kindness of India that it is not very active, because Sark, since its existence, it has not been allowed to play its role. I think if we can activate Sark, and if some sense prevails, we can benefit from this organization and bring peace to the region. And since Afghanistan is also part of Sark, I think Sark can be a very good forum. Sark can be a very good platform to address issues in Afghanistan.
We've also seen the role of the SCO. Now, the SCO has started playing a role. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization has had deliberations on this issue. Do you think that given that India, Pakistan, China, and Russia as full members in the SCO, the Afghans having a role in that organization, do you think the SCO can play a bigger role here?
Yes, of course. I think SCO, since it is largely driven by China and Russia, so both the countries are on one page with regard to Afghanistan situation. As I say, since there is a kind of hostility between China and the US and Russia and the US, so there was a kind of a measure of satisfaction with both countries' capitals when the US left. So when US left this, so physical influence of US has waned in the region. So I think SCO is another, like Sark, SCO is another body which can play a very important role in addressing not only Afghan's problem but other problems in the region.
This is a question that comes from Suranga, where he takes several points that were also mentioned in terms of NATO leaving. Many weapons aircraft have been left behind. China has had rounds of discussions with the Taliban. Do you think that this is all directed towards consolidation of CPEC, or making sure that CPEC does not get derailed?
Wait, this is an important question. The Indian influence in Afghanistan, Indian influence elsewhere in the region, in fact, was playing a kind of negative role in trying to undermine CPEC. And of course, when we talk of expansion of Belt and Road Initiative towards Central Asia, so it is also a kind of hurdle. When you are letting peace, peace in Afghanistan was not in the interest of India. Instability in Afghanistan was in the interest of India. So peace in the region is in the interest of CPEC and Belt and Road Initiative. So if there's no peace in the region, so CPEC will be affected, of course. The way we find that there were terrorism incidences occurring in Pakistan, and there was RAW and other hostile agencies behind it. So it was very important to have peace in Afghanistan and elsewhere to make a CPEC a success and BRI a success. I think this would be a positive development. I think Taliban should also, since they need a kind of economic connectivity in the region, so it would be good for Taliban, Afghan government also, to welcome peace and welcome CPEC and expansion of CPEC towards Afghanistan and subsequently to Central Asia.
We're coming to the end now, Dr. Shabbir. We've taken so many questions. We focused on so many areas. We actually looked beyond South Asia also in terms of looking at Central Asia and countries like Iran and Turkey too. Finally, when we look at the situation that is unfolding, we saw 1979 and the entry of the Soviet Union was a massive turning point, not only for that country, but for our entire region. It had an impact on Pakistan, impact on India, impact on Sri Lanka. You name it, it impacted lots of countries. Going forward, when we look back at 2021, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now, what do you think is going to be the lesson we have learned? Have we learned a lesson? Is that why we are being cautious right now before taking a stance? Is that why there's this wait and see operation going on? How do you think we will look at 2021 in the years ahead?
Dr. George, very interesting. There was an American scholar telling about America, that they commit 100 mistakes than to commit one right thing. So do they commit 100 wrongs before committing one right? I think the world powers, major powers, as well as regional powers should realize that if we have to work for humanity, if we want to create a better world, if we want to create a peaceful world, if we work for our generations, we will have to, be above our egos. The big countries, the powers have egos. The regional powers have egos. So they will have to behave, being above from their egos, and we'll have to look for solutions of the problems. For instance, the world powers, major powers, as well as regional, should be generous enough to address the issues. So if you resolve these issues, I think this should be one of the resolutions of major powers and regional powers, to resolve the issues. You bring back a peaceful world. These countries have responsibility to peace the world, and I think and if you know what happens, you got defeated in Vietnam, and now you are defeated in Afghanistan. So why do you do that? There were same voices inside America also were telling them, negotiate, dialogue, talk to them. Your one person is killed. Okay, we don't approve of any killing anywhere in the world, but if your one person is killed and you kill 100 and you kill millions, so this is justice. Being a big country, being a big regional neighbor, you have big responsibility, and you have the responsibility to peace in the world. So I think big major powers as well as regional powers need to have big hearts, and they must accommodate, and they should resolve these issues on merit. And if you don't do that, you just see, we had a very great thinking general who used to say, you need to have a basis for a conflict. You need to have a moral basis to attack a country. You are invading a country without any moral justification, without any moral, basis, foundation for that, you will lose. And that is how it came to be true. I think bigger power, lesson is that bigger powers, major powers have responsibility to international peace, international justice, and the smaller countries, they should look to them for justice and peace. So it's, playing proxies and playing, nasty and playing, everywhere and trying to exploit, the situation, economic disparities. I think the age and era for these things is gone. I think we need to look ahead. We need to look, and the bigger countries, the major powers have responsibility to peace and justice in future, and that is how we should look at it. Thank you.
Definitely. Going forward, what we are beginning to see is that there is an exit to one power and maybe the entry of another. This is probably one of those key changing moments in history that will be very, very decisive. And it is interesting to see how these situations are going to develop, how they are going to evolve in the months, in the years, in the decades ahead. But something that we don't want from a South Asian perspective, we certainly don't want a situation evolving in which Afghanistan becomes the terrorist capital of the world, as some are claiming it to be, or it goes into further state of chaos, because that will just destabilize all of our countries. And that's the last thing that we want in South Asia. We've got enough of our own issues to deal with. Afghanistan is a part of the community. We've got to make sure that everyone is having a safer, more peaceful, stable environment for them to thrive. Thank you very much, Dr. Shabbir, for taking time. I know it's been a busy time for you these last few days and your colleagues as well. Thank you so much for taking time to join us on the Awarelogue Lecture Forum. We thank everyone for the questions that you sent in, for participating, for being a very interactive audience and being a part of this fourth Awarelogue Lecture Forum. We will be continuing next week. We have the culture site. We have Michelle Pereira joining us from Australia, broadcaster, actor, and arts activist, who will be talking about cross-cultural perspectives as you pursue a passion. That's another platform that we have coming up next week. And of course, we have other events coming up too. We have a very special Decoding Diplomacy podcast coming up in September, which we shall tell you about soon as well. So thank you once again. Thank you, Dr. Shabbir. And thank you very much to everyone for your time, your views, and also your attention throughout this last hour.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank
and
you.
thank you very much, audience. Thank you.